Good afternoon. Hello, everyone. Great to see you. So hello and welcome to our first Changemaker speaker series of 2023. My name is Fiona Wilson, and I have the honor of serving as the Deputy Chief Sustainability Officer here at UNH and as Director of our Sustainability Institute. I'm also a proud affiliate faculty member at UNH's Paul College of Business and Economics. The topic of today's event is clean energy, and specifically how we're making the transition to a carbon-free economy. We're delighted that you can join us here today at UNH, the state's flagship public research university. I think it's a very fitting location for this topic. Why would I say that? UNH was the first in the country, the first university in the country to establish an Institute of Sustainability in 1997 and is celebrating its 25th anniversary this year. And today, because of a quarter of a century of commitment to sustainability, UNH is only one of 11 institutions in the country to have achieved a Platinum Stars rating from the Association for the Advancement of Sustainability in Higher Education, or as we call it, ASHE. And within that group, UNH currently has the 5th highest rating of all universities in the country for sustainability. So for all of the students and alums in the audience, I hope that generates a little bit of wildcat pride. Good. We're certainly very proud of our national leadership in sustainability, but not so much because of the status and reputation, but really because of the impact it means we are able to have now and hopefully in the future, particularly in this pivotal decade and this time in world history of particular challenge on so many fronts. UNH has been working towards greenhouse gas emissions reductions for decades, and we have already cut our carbon footprint by more than 50% since 2001. Last year's update of WILDCAP, that's the Climate Action Plan, laid out continued ambitious reduction goals in line with science-based recommendations. You may also not know, because it's not always well known or very visible here on campus, but the vast majority of our energy that powers our Durham campus is renewable energy. And we have a very unique source for that, landfill gas. We were the first university in the country to use landfill gas as our primary fuel source, and it's a unique partnership that we have with the company Waste Management. Through that partnership, landfill gas comes from the Rochester landfill through our eco line and then gets converted into electricity here on campus. So this not only avoids greenhouse gas pollution by keeping the methane from being released at the landfill into the atmosphere, but it also obviously drastically reduces the amount of fossil fuel we would need to use here to power this campus. We also have some power contracts that help support responsible small hydroelectric dam owners here in New Hampshire, again, increasing the amount of carbon-free hydropower on the local grid and supporting local businesses. And we continue to explore actively ways that we will expand our renewable power profile in the years to come. I think something else that's probably not well known about UNH, but I would love it to be better known, is that we're the home to something called SciMap. This is a research-driven software platform developed by UNH, which allows organizations of all kinds to measure, report, and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. We first developed it over 20 years ago here for measuring and reporting our own greenhouse gas emissions, but we now operate it for public benefit, and it's used by over 500 other institutions around the country and around the world. And we're starting to use SciMap to create powerful educational experiences for UNH students, like many of you. So the Carbon Clinic is that we launched just last semester. It's a program which leverages these 20 years of expertise in greenhouse gas accounting to train students in that methodology and the underlying science. And then we support those students to help them engage with local companies, local organizations to develop carbon footprint analysis and climate action plans for those businesses and those nonprofits. So if that's an area that you're interested in getting into, really encourage you to check out the Carbon Clinic for the fall semester. The Carbon Clinic is just one example of our programs here at UNH, which connect you, our students, with hands-on sustainability education. It's all part of what we call the Changemaker Collaborative. It's a unique collaboration between the UNH Sustainability Institute, the Paul College of Business and Economics, and the Carsey School of Public Policy. And it's really about offering opportunities for students from every one of the 5 colleges here at UNH, these opportunities. The collaborative is all about supporting the next generation of skilled, courageous, and confident leaders through real-world experiences, while also helping our community partners, businesses, nonprofits, municipalities around the state and around the New England region to help those organizations advance their own sustainability initiatives. So for students in the audience today, we encourage you, again, students from any major, to check out the various programs we offer here at UNH, which allows you to get this direct, hands-on experience in sustainability working alongside our many community partners. And if there are community partners in the audience as well, please reach out if you're interested in connecting with some of these passionate and talented students from UNH so we can help you meaningfully advance your own sustainability initiatives. Before we hear from today's speakers, just a few words of thanks. We'd like to thank our faculty colleagues, all of whom are bringing students to this event today as part of their courses this semester, so thank you to all of you. And then also just a thank you to our co-hosts. We're pleased to partner with our colleagues at UNH and beyond to do this event, including the UNH Library, which is a new partner this semester, and the Responsible Governance and Sustainable Citizenship project here at UNH's College of Liberal Arts that has been a consistent partner in helping make these events possible. So we thank all of our partners, as well as those partners in the Changemaker Collaborative. We also thank New Hampshire Businesses for Social Responsibility. They are an external partner and invite their members to attend these events as well. So we host these events here, the Changemaker Speaker Series, because we know the vital importance of shining a light both on innovative practices that are advancing sustainability in meaningful ways, but also, I think really importantly, on the people, right? The pioneers, the thought leaders behind this work. Because we know that for UNH students, and others, being able to connect with and learn from these powerful role models is really important. Today's topic about how we have a clean energy future for not just this state, but beyond, I think couldn't be more timely or more important. I'm incredibly grateful to our friend and longtime community partner, Sam Evans-Brown, who is Executive Director of the nonprofit Clean Energy New Hampshire, who is going to be moderating today's dialogue. Joining Sam in conversation will be Fortunat Mueller, President of Revision Energy, as well as April Salas, Executive Director of the Arthur L. Irving Institute for Energy and Society at Dartmouth College. A very warm welcome to each of you. And I also want to share a very special Wildcat welcome to Tom Meissner, who is CEO of Unitil. We're especially pleased to be welcoming Tom, a UNH alum from the Paul College of Business and Economics, back to campus today to join this conversation. The UNH Sustainability Institute has been partnering with Tom and his colleagues at Unitil over the last several years, and we're delighted to be supporting Unitil in their sustainability journey. I also want to give a special shout out to Sarah Sankiewicz, Director of Sustainability at Unitil, and David Larson, Sustainability Analyst at Unitil. David actually has this position today after he obtained it after participating in UNH's Summer Sustainability Fellowship a couple of years ago. So we're really grateful, Sarah, David, Tom, we're really grateful to all of you at Unitil and look forward to many future collaborations towards a sustainable future. So you can learn more about the backgrounds of our speakers. I'm sure they'll be sharing some of that with you today, but their bios are also on our website. So let me just give a quick reminder, we're going to have plenty of time for questions from the audience in the latter part of today, so be thinking of questions as we go through that you'd like to ask. There'll be a couple of roving microphones in the audience when we get to that portion. But let me just say thank you to all of our speakers, Sam, April, Fortunat, and Tom for being with us today, and I'm going to hand over to them for a great dialogue. Thanks, everyone.
So not only am I going to be pestering these folks with my questions, but I was also tasked with sort of level setting and just setting the context for the discussion before we started. So forgive me, but I'm going to run through some slides. I'm a big fan of slides myself, but I'm just going to draw your attention first to the title that I put up here. Just take it in. I'll talk about it in a second, but I just wanted to make sure that everyone had seen it, and I'll tell you why in a second. So this is where the electricity that's powering this building right now is coming from in New England. We're a regional grid. We share our electricity generation with all of the states that surround us, and this is the trend. So over the past 20 years, there's been a rather dramatic shift in where our electricity comes from, and the shift mostly has been characterized as a shift away from coal and oil and towards natural gas. There's been tens of thousands of megawatts of new natural gas-fired power plants that have been built over the course of those past 2 decades. So just so you know, that's where we're at now, 40%-ish on an annual basis, natural gas. And then the green down there, the renewable slice is sitting around 9%. I think of the most up-to-date numbers, it's up above 10, maybe at 11 or 12% now. But this has been a dramatic decline in emissions, but it has mostly come from fuel switching away from coal and oil, which are the most emissions-intensive fuels. So that's where we're at right now. This is the driver of a lot of where we're headed. So these are the state's greenhouse gas reduction goals. You'll notice there's a notable exception from this list. It's the state you're sitting in. There's a little Q. And in fact, just yesterday, Maine announced that they're making that goal even more, or the governor of Maine would like to make that goal even more aggressive than it is. They want to hit that 100% goal by 2040 as opposed to 2050, according to new legislation that is being introduced in Maine as we speak. So that's one driver. And then this is the other driver. So this is what's referred to as levelized costs of energy. These numbers are a little out of date. I think for solar, they've actually ticked up ever so slightly since 2019, mostly because of the COVID supply chain crunches. But in reality, you know, that change is pretty minimal compared to what you see here. And this is why I titled these slides "The New Phase of Clean Energy." It's actually a phrase that I stole from someone much smarter than me, an investor/fiction writer named Ramez Nam, who said, you know, there are multiple phases of the deployment of clean energy. The first is one in which it is a infant technology that's very expensive and requires subsidies to roll out. The second phase is when the technology is cost competitive with new generation, and so this was, you know, in the sort of 2017 to 2020 timeframe. It suddenly started to look more attractive to deploy new renewable generation than to deploy fossil fuel generation. And then the new phase is when the cost of renewable generation drops below the cost of running existing fossil generation. And this is when we start to imagine that a really disruptive change is about to come underway. And Ramez Nam and myself, I tend to agree with him, think that we're in that third phase now. So this is where we're headed, according to a single think tank's ideas. For New England to eliminate emissions from its energy system, these are the 4 pillars of how we get there. Energy efficiency and conservation drive a decrease in energy demand writ large. Electrification drives fossil fuel use out of the mix and results in an increasing share of our economy that's driven by electricity. The fuels that we do use, we drive carbon out of those fuels, reduce the emissions intensities of those fuels by starting to introduce renewable fuels or fuels that are generated through technologies like carbon capture, and then we decarbonize the electricity system as we go. And in order to get there, what is expected by anyone who's looking at this is a dramatic rise in the amount of electricity that we consume. And so in order to do that, we need to build a lot of new generation capacity here in New England. This is actually a fairly conservative forecast that anticipates a doubling of electricity in New England, a doubling of the amount of terawatt hours of electricity that we consume. There are others that I've seen that anticipate a tripling or even more. So that's how we get there. And this is from ISO New England, which is the entity that runs our electricity grid. So what you see here is a change between 2000 and 2040 in each of these types of technologies in terms of how much they're generating on the grid. This is what ISO New England forecasts will happen in order to decarbonize our grid. So going from 11%, where we are today, to 56% renewable generation by 2040 to hit those goals. So that's the big picture, which if it doesn't make you really excited about where we're headed and the amount of change that's going to occur in the next couple of decades, then I haven't done my job. And that, I think, is the context that I am hoping to come into this conversation with, and which I hope that each of our panelists can address in terms of how we get from where we are here to how we get there. So why don't we start? I'll sit down. Can I go back? Great, okay. Why don't we start? and I'll let each of you introduce yourselves, tell the audience what you do and how it intersects with this conversation, and then we'll go to questions.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you, Sam. It was a really thoughtful framing. My name is April Salas. I'm the Executive Director of the Irving Institute for Energy and Society at Dartmouth College. Very long-winded, but I am really thrilled to be here with you all today. And I think, in the vein of long-winded, just to sort of give you a snapshot of my background and how I got to where I am, and why I think this conversation is important. I started in this industry, over 20 years ago when it was a very different landscape, and the conversations we were having were quite different. Even in Fiona's introductory remarks, the number of roles that I heard that had sustainability in the name is just something that didn't exist 20 years ago, didn't exist really 10 years ago. And so I hope that all of you will be inspired by this conversation, because the pace of change and the pace of innovation is picking up at a more rapid clip than we've ever seen, at least in my lifetime. And I think as many of you are studying the arc of history of the energy industry, there's just been an intense, rapid period of innovation. And I think we expect that to not only continue, but to increase. So I think what you're doing just by virtue of being here and studying these subjects is really important to the future of where we are in New Hampshire, but also in our region. I came to Dartmouth from the government. I started in the private sector doing energy finance consulting overseas. I've worked in over 65 countries, looking at everything from really broken systems where there are no processes in place, no governance structures, to really advanced systems where we think about how to stabilize or transition very large and complex infrastructure. I brought those skill sets to the U.S. Department of Energy, where I helped to establish a department that was focused on our national security and energy security posture. So how we actually think about where the flows of our energy come from, who we trade with, and how we position ourselves for the economy of the 21st century. I think all of you would be remiss if we are not into this sort of rapid, intense period of uncertainty as well, and we've seen supply chains disrupted. I think for my journey coming into the industry when it was very much sort of a one-size-fits-all business model within the traditional oil and gas and power and utilities, but also the role that companies played. I started very, very early at a role in what used to be called CSR, corporate social responsibility. Even that term has evolved. It was a one-person shop, not centrally attached to the core strategic mission of the organization. It was very much, in my view, a tool for extractive access to local communities for their natural resources. So coming to the government and helping to shape that conversation and how we as a country prioritize who we engage with, but also how we prepare for the grid and the energy system of the 21st century was really important. And I led a very important initiative called the Quadrennial Energy Review, which was an initiative under President Obama and in partnership in complement to now we talk about the IRA, the du jour sort of infusion of capital was ARA, the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. And a lot of the enabling technologies that we benefit in this transition today was from that surge of capital and focus by the government on understanding and baselining the US energy system, but also trying or attempting to create a pathway to understand where our roadmap is to be best positioned to steer investments. So really excited to be here with you today. I think you can look at the bios and can talk about Dartmouth and the Irving Institute, but I think I'm really excited to hear from our other panelists. Thank you.
My name's Tom Meissner. I'm the CEO of Unitil. Let me just start by saying it's great to be back on campus again. So it's been quite a while, and I really enjoyed my time here. For those of you who are not familiar with Unitil, and many of you probably are not, we're a provider of electricity and natural gas here in New Hampshire, but also in Maine and Massachusetts as well. But we're a New Hampshire-based company, and most of our operations are here in New Hampshire. As a utility company, one thing I want to probably point out at the beginning is we're considered to be a T&D only company, which means we distribute electricity to customers, but we don't actually own the generation here in New England. So New England as a whole went through a process about 25 years ago referred to as industry restructuring, where the generation markets were deregulated and became competitive markets. As part of that, customers are now actually allowed to choose their own energy supplier if they choose. And many customers do, but unfortunately I think the vast majority do not, simply because they're probably not aware of the options that are available to them. So, as a company, what we do is really the poles and wires down the street that deliver the electricity to your home, but the electricity itself is generated in regional wholesale markets by large central generators, as well as increasing amounts of distributed energy in other clean energy projects. As a regulated utility, sometimes it can be a little frustrating because we, as a natural monopoly, we're not allowed to just pursue strategies or pursue services that we might actually want to do without going through extensive regulatory proceedings and without actually proving direct benefits to customers. So we might have a strategy, for example, to install solar, but unless we can prove that it will benefit all of our customers, that really wouldn't be allowed for a utility. So we are constrained by the regulatory framework that we operate under. With all of that said, I would say sustainability is integral to all of our strategies at the company. Every single strategy is either about helping customers adopt clean energy, about expanding tariff offerings to make, for example, electric vehicle charging more attractive. We have a strategy that's really to increase hosting capacity on our system so we can have significant amounts of clean distributed energy on our system. Our goal there is to increase our hosting capacity to 50% of peak load by 2030. We have our own sustainability goals. Our Director of Corporate Sustainability is here. And we have a goal to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 50% by 2030 and to be net zero by 2050. So we are pursuing strategies in all of these areas. And one thing I will mention is there's a very specific provision under state law that even though we're generally not allowed to own generation, we are allowed to own essentially distributed energy resources of renewable generation for very specific reasons, like for offsetting our system losses. So we're in the process of developing a solar project in Kingston that when it's completed will be actually the largest solar project in the state. And I'm pleased to mention here today that we'll be partnering with Revision Energy on that project to develop that project. So with that, I'll turn it over to Fortunat.
Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, I guess. My name is Fortunat Mueller. I'm president and co-founder of Revision Energy. We are also delighted to be partnering with Tom and with Unitil on that project. Revision is a certified B Corp and 100% employee-owned company. We're celebrating our 20th anniversary this year. And from the beginning, our mission, our reason for being, was to help transition New England from fossil fuel economy to a clean energy economy. 20 years ago, that was laughably delusional, mission statement to make. But increasingly, it feels like, this is a thing we're going to do. And so, that is delightful for us, and we're really excited about it. The way we do that has changed over time. We are a diversified energy service company. Most of our business today is designing, developing, building, and then maintaining solar energy projects of all scales, from residential rooftop projects up to larger utility scale projects and larger DG. We also do what Sam referred to as beneficial electrification, which is we again, design and build and install projects to help move end uses of electricity from direct use of fossil fuels to electricity. And those are things like energy storage, electric vehicle charging, heat pumps, heat pump water heaters, all the places where either homeowners or businesses are currently burning fuel. We are replacing it with electricity over time so that we can then make that electricity in a clean way. And that, as you said, is the pathway to deep decarbonization in New England. Revision started in Maine in 2003. We now have 5 offices across Maine, New Hampshire, and Massachusetts. And I think that's it for me for an intro.
So the question I want to put to each of you is, as I posed at the beginning, there's a lot of change that's coming. And I think the question is, how is the system that we have today going to look different in 2040, 2050, if we are in fact going to drive emissions out of our energy system? And I think to each of you, the question is sort of different, right? So how will the utility look different? I think is the easy, sort of the mulligan, right? Like, that's the easy one that we know. And then how will homes and businesses look different is perhaps the question for revision. But then also, April, I think as an educator of young people, how do we prepare the next generation of the workforce for what's coming? And so maybe we'll take it in that order.
Okay. Well, from a utility standpoint, I don't know if it's a mulligan, but
I'm not a golfer.
We definitely see customers adopting a lot of clean technologies in the years ahead. And so that could be everything from rooftop solar, generating your own electricity, could be electric vehicles, other clean technologies. And so the power system itself is going to become increasingly distributed from what it was in the past. In the past, power was produced at large central generating plants. It was transmitted to local utilities and distributed to people that consumed electricity. In the future, a lot of customers are going to generate their own electricity. They're going to have new technologies in the home that didn't exist in the past. So we have to prepare for a power system that's going to look very different than it has in the 20th century, for example. And in fact, in our Massachusetts company, we're already seeing that. We have distributed energy resources on the system that now actually exceed our load at times. So we're having to install energy storage and other types of technology systems just to be able to accommodate all that energy on our system. At a little bit of a higher level, in terms of, say, New England, to talk about a bigger picture, we're going to need massive amounts of clean energy. A lot of that is going to be in the form of offshore wind, which is going to be developed, thousands of megawatts of offshore wind. Some of it's going to be Canadian hydro. These are big projects. They're very difficult projects to permit. Many of the projects have already run into problems, and many people probably heard of Northern Pass, which failed, Cape Wind, which failed. Now there's the New England Clean Energy Connect project in Maine, transmission project, that is at the Supreme Court because a voter referendum attempted to overturn the construction of the line. So, yeah, it's going to be a very difficult process, I think, bringing on the clean energy resources that we need in the years ahead. And it's going to be a slow transition. It's not going to happen overnight. I think it's going to happen over a period of many years, if not decades, just given the size of these projects. So.
Sure, I'll pick it up from there. As Tom said, I think there's a sort of engineering challenge, right, in terms of adopting the grid to where we're going in the future. From a grid that has a couple of large centrally owned generating stations, one directional flow of energy out to a whole bunch of different customers who are just customers and consumers of energy, to a grid that is truly bidirectional. And I mean that in two distinct ways. One, that there are more and more customers on the ends of the lines generating at least a portion of their own energy from rooftop solar primarily. And so, as Tom said, there are times when a particular circuit or substation is actually flowing power in the reverse direction, and that has sort of engineering implications for the hardware. The other piece is that increasingly, as we move from dispatchable fossil fuel generation to variable renewable generation, some mix of primarily wind, water, and solar, and offshore wind, if you count that separately, we have to replace, the modern grid is an absolute engineering marvel. Every second of the year, the energy being generated on the grid has to match the energy being consumed on the grid. You think about that, millions of consumers, thousands of generators have to be matched second by second because there's effectively no energy storage, no meaningful energy storage on the grid today. And we do that today mostly by turning up and down rapidly natural gas-fired power plants. In the future, you're not turning up and down rapidly an offshore wind turbine. It's making power when the wind is blowing. And so some of that load balancing ends up happening on the demand side. That is to say, customers are shaping their load to match generation rather than always shaping generation to match load. And so that's a massive shift in how individuals interact with their utility and energy in their houses. And that brings me to the second part, which I think is harder than the engineering challenge, which is the sort of regulatory and market challenge. Now you have to find a way to send market signals to customers. Hey, don't run your dishwasher at 2 p.m., run it at 4 p.m. because the wind's going to be blowing more or the sun's coming out from behind a cloud. And in practice, that's not going to be like a series of text messages or a phone call from your utility, right? It's going to be, an automated, distributed, digital, responsive system on the demand side. But it means that every customer is effectively now a part of the grid interaction. And it's wildly more complicated. And our regulatory systems, the Public Utilities Commissions and whatnot, are not built for you and I to participate. And so there's a really massive change that is needed in terms of the regulatory paradigm in order to make those things possible for customers. And those things are, the only way that there are other ways to get to 100% clean energy. They're the only ways we get to 100% clean energy in an affordable and fast way. And it needs to be affordable and fast. And I'll add one more thing, which is we got to do that while making sure that we are not only not propagating forward the inequities that exist in our current energy systems, but affirmatively making things better. And so one of the big challenges that I think we are all working on all the time is how do we make sure that the clean energy transition is a just and equitable transition? Because the way I think about it is, we're in the business of saving the planet, right? That's what we do. We're unabashed about having an ambitious goal, but we also want to make the planet worth saving. And the planet worth saving means, making our communities more equitable and fair. And so this is a once in a generation, maybe a once in 2 century opportunity to undo and redo some of the things that we have done poorly in the energy system we have today. And we missed that opportunity at our own peril. And April will tell us how she's going to fix it.
Oh, wow, no pressure. No, I think that's a great tee up, too, because I think for all of the students in the room, you're at a really unique inflection point, like Fortunat said, which comes once or twice in a century. And the pace of innovation and change is so rapid. I mean, I think of Tony Seba's, famous picture of the, New York City downtown, and he's like, where do you spot the internal combustion engine, the car, amongst these horse and buggies? And then the same picture in the same location 10 years later, and you can only find one horse and buggy, and it's all internal combustion engine vehicles. And that was in the early 1900s. We're seeing the sort of rapid pace of innovation and change at a transformational clip, faster than we've ever seen. And you guys are lucky. You have this roadmap. The ISO New England data that Sam showed isn't someone's like guess in the air. That's based on projected projects and signals that the market is putting out in terms of what future capacity will look like. So you actually have this really unique roadmap that sort of guides you on this path of where we have an indicative signal that the industry is going. And I think that the other interesting statistic is, I think last year, climate tech investments reached over $70 billion in the VC space. And if we look at, the Clean Tech Revolution 1.0, that last year's investments cumulatively are more than the cumulative investments in that period of, I think, 2007 to 2011 in the Clean Tech 1.0. So it's happening, and capital is flooding in this direction. So when I think about skilling, one thing that you should be really excited about, and I think one thing that us energy wonks get really excited about is we always talk about the technology. We always talk about what's the feedstock? Is it solar? Is it wind? Is it nuclear? What do you think about hydro? What do you think about hydrogen? All these what ifs. But what you're hearing is that there is a wholesale systemic change that has to happen on every level, from the regulatory environment to the policies to the nonprofits to the consumer to technologies. And it's touching everything from the vehicles you drive to the scooters you drive to your phone in your pocket to pretty much everything in society. So the jobs that will exist for that skill set touch everything. So if you like marketing, you can do it. We need those skills too. If you like operations, we need those skills too. This isn't just for the engineers in the room. These are for the social scientists, the humanities. These are people who need to help inspire this systemic change that's required and help especially the most marginally vulnerable communities think about how to do this in an equitable and sort of affordable way, because we're going to need the whole of the system to change. And I always like that African proverb, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And this is what we have to do. And specific to our region, we have economic diversity, we have energy poverty, housing insecurity, food insecurity. We have all the same systemic issues that underpin or rely on how affordable and available that clean energy is, and then also the overlay of health inequity. So for the folks in the room that are at the point of what to study and what compels you, the thing that I like about my job is I've been able to reinvent the types of roles I've had 4 or 5 times over, and it keeps changing. It is an ever-changing, ever-exciting landscape, and I can't even foresee with AI coming out, probably 10 years ahead of schedule, even with ChatGPT and some other things. I just think the pace of innovation and the skills that are going to be required for all of you to help us in this transition are ever present. So I think it's a really exciting period, and I would encourage you to think about how you bring, liberal arts thinking, the engineering, the systems. I think data analysis will be a really big theme, but there's also the human element in helping the transition, helping people understand, because uncertainty exists, and I think that's always difficult. So it should feel like a really exciting time to enter this industry.
I wanna draw out this equity question a little more, and ask each of you concretely what you think is needed if the energy transition is going to be just and equitable. And just to maybe set a little context here, a lot of our energy transition policies as it stands have been done through the tax code, which represents a fundamental problem, because if you do not have any tax burden, you can't take advantage of many of the subsidies that are being sent our way. And that's for solar power, that's for electric vehicles, that's for a lot of the consumer side choices. So just with maybe that prompting, how do you think is it the policy system that needs to change? Is it, what do we need in order to make sure that this is just and equitable?
I'm happy to start, because this one I care deeply about. I think one of the things we have to do first is recognize implicit bias and the unintended consequences of the transition and some of the efforts we're trying to lead. I work a lot in the community level, at the state level, and trying to build regional coalitions. And one of the things that even in our own community we realized is that all of our programs that are geared around energy efficiency, renewable energy deployment, all the behind the meter stuff, we're geared towards people who own their homes or can come to a meeting at 10 a.m. on a Tuesday. And that is actually not the predominance of the state of New Hampshire. And so when we recognize that, some of the unintended consequences of these programs are actually leaving out the vast majority of the people who will be disproportionately burdened by this shift, it's a real problem. And we have to pause and think about, in Hanover, for example, we actually just paused and we said, how do we define community member? Like, what does that actually mean? And what we realized is that we had been preferencing people who owned their homes or had expendable income, not the people who were commuting in from far distances to clean our buildings, to work in our restaurants, to come to school, the students themselves, or sometimes residents for 2 or 3 or 4 years. How do we factor in those efforts? And I think that's an area that we have to really be thoughtful about in our programmatic design, beyond things like use of the tax code, because that in and of itself is talking about a specific slice of society, when in reality, we need to be out in the communities and really listening and taking into account some of the really pressing needs. What we don't want is for renewable energy and the clean energy economy to feel like a nice to have. We want to make sure it's a must have, and in the must have, it needs to include everyone in the journey, or else we're going to arrive at a place where we have a really bifurcated situation of haves and have-nots. And that'll be a dangerous place, especially as we're thinking about shifts in the grid and how our pricing schemes work and how folks like Unitil, are sort of boxed into how they send out the bills and who gets those, because it will be at a really uneven pace if we don't look at it from a systemic and holistic way.
No, just to add to that, I agree with that 100%. I think aside from the tax code, whether it's a tax code or whether it's utility rates or policies or incentives, they generally are structured, I think, for homeowners. That's a good example. If you think about, who's able to install solar, for example, it's homeowners. People that live in apartments are largely unable to take advantage of that. If you look at people who are buying electric vehicles, it's largely affluent people that can afford electric vehicles. So, in many of these policies, the policies are designed to incentivize what we want to happen. Maybe it's clean energy, maybe it's electrification, but we definitely have to come up with policies that are structured in a way that it doesn't leave people behind that cannot take advantage of those policies. So it's a complicated question from a utility context. I don't want to get into some of the policies that are probably wrought with controversy, I guess, but I do think environmental justice is a very important topic. And we have entire, environmental justice communities in our territory. So that's another whole level. How do we address communities in a way that maintains affordable and reliable electricity for all? So I do think it's a very important topic.
So I couldn't agree more. I think this is both, for us, we see this both as fundamentally a moral issue, right? We have this opportunity to make the world better with our work and to make the world more equitable. It's also, frankly, just a practical thing, which is if we want the energy transition to be successful and durable, it has to be inclusive. There's just no other way to do it. I think April's points about sort of the things that we broadly call procedural equity are often overlooked and really important. The folks in the room having the conversations about what this are going to look like are currently not representative of the folks who are impacted. And that's, that's true sort of, at the Public Utilities Commission where, to participate, you essentially have to hire a lawyer or be available, 15 Thursdays in a row for a case conference, which is practical for only a tiny sliver of interested parties. And so there's lots of work to do, sort of foundational work to do to make sure we are bringing the right voices into the policy conversations. On the policy questions, sort of the narrow policy questions themselves, I would say the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, which passed last year, is maybe the most meaningful investment in equity with respect to clean energy transition that we have ever seen, and there's still lots of work to do in implementation. But there is, for the first time, a policy preference for projects that serve historically disadvantaged communities or environmental justice communities, money. Putting your money where your mouth is on that stuff because it is what it takes to do. There are also sort of small ball practical stuff we can do. States that have robust community solar programs do a better job of serving low-income homeowners with solar than states without. If, as Tom says, if your only option to do solar is on your roof, you're only doing solar if you have a roof, and if you own that roof or you expect to be there for a while. If your option to do solar is also, a shared solar project out in the field somewhere, that's more accessible for more people. It's not a panacea, but it certainly is, one of the tools. I'd say Maine, our neighbor to the north, is doing a pretty good job with electric vehicles. There is they made the decision to rebate used electric vehicles, understanding that, the populations with the highest energy burden are mostly not buying new cars. They're certainly not buying new $50,000 cars. And so let's prioritize our public investment in those places that need it. And I think there's a number of other examples. I guess the last thing I will say is a big part of this is about finance, project finance, because one of the one of the things that's true across almost all the energy transition technologies is we are replacing operating cost with capital cost, right? You build a natural gas power plant, you spend a little for the power plant, and then you buy natural gas for 100 years to fuel the thing. You build a wind turbine out in the Gulf of Maine, or you build a solar project out in the field, and almost all the cost, there's some operating cost, but almost all the cost is front-loaded in capital cost. And so the ability to and that's the same thing is true, at the residential level or smaller level too. And so the ability to finance on competitive terms projects is the difference between being able to doing those things and not being able to do those things. And finance is one of the places where obstacles have existed for marginalized communities, in many cases by design, not by accident. And we have an opportunity to undo that. And there's a lot of work happening around that, around New England, around the country. And I think that's one of the more exciting places. Because, as Sam said, clean is cheaper than dirty. We just have to make it available. And the people who need cheaper the most, we have to make it available there.
$27 billion in the IRA for green banks that is supposed to go to low-income communities, and they just announced the guidance yesterday. So I don't know if anyone's had a chance to read through that multiple 100-page document. So one last question, then we're going to get to Q&A from the crowd. We have a room very full, much fuller than I expected it to be, of students. If you were to give advice to the folks in front of you right now about how to participate, we've had some advice already, but what would be the advice that you'd give to this crowd about how to get involved?
Well, I think one of the things that I certainly recognize is that there's a degree of anxiety that exists today about things beyond climate, but just the world. It feels very ever present and heavy. And so I had this quote from a book it's called Be Anxious for Nothing. And the quote is, learn from the past, prepare for the future, but live in the present moment. And I think that's really, really powerful because right now you have this opportunity to be engaged in a way where your voice matters, and you have the tools and channels, and you're also sort of charting your path for how to engage in ways that previous generations had a rule book to follow. And I think that's really, really inspiring. I would advocate strongly, it sounds like your program already embraces experiential learning, but take what you learned from the classroom and as a student, go out and try and test and learn and develop skills that you can take with you, soft skills and hard skills, into this career, whether you're going into energy and climate as a core focus or, it's an ancillary, sort of attribute to your role. It's just something that every company and every organization is thinking deeply about. And so you owe it to yourself to build those skills and develop those muscles because we're seeing it reflected in everything from finance roles to accounting, corporate accounting. The SEC is considering this down to, installing rooftop solar or anything else. And it's a really good opportunity for you to use this time as students to make good use of these incredible programs that you have to develop those muscles because they're going to be needed and as a base are going to prepare you for a really long and productive future.
From the standpoint of utility, for students, I would say this is a very exciting time if you're interested in this field. For 100 years, our industry really didn't change rapidly at all. I don't think energy utilities in particular were ever considered to be, a highly desirable field. It was always a good job that had a good paycheck. But now everything's much different. I mean, energy is going to be where it's at in terms of innovation, in terms of change. And it's not just engineers, as was mentioned. I mean, financial analysts, other professions are all going to be involved in this transformation. And this transformation is going to last a long time. It's not a 5 or 10 year transformation. This is a career. You could go into this field and plan to be employed in this field until the day you're retired. And I think it will always be exciting, and there will always be change, and it will be an opportunity to really do good in a career that I think is exciting for a lot of people. So, as a student, I would really encourage you to think about, the types of jobs and the types of things that you might be able to do in the field of energy, innovation, sustainable energy, or even electric vehicles, batteries. There's many other things that are going to require some very smart people. If you're not interested in that as a career, well, then I think over time you can at least think about, well, geez, what impact are you making? Because the fact of the matter is, what's really driving climate change isn't so much the generation, it's the fact that everybody wants to use energy. I mean, energy powers everything. It powers our homes, it powers our cars. If there wasn't a need for that energy, we wouldn't have carbon emissions. So the first thing everybody can do is try to reduce your footprint. You can do that through efficiency, by changes in your life. You know, everybody says energy efficiency is the first way to approach this problem. And that's where I think everybody can do their part.
Awesome. I'm relieved to hear Tom thinks there's 20, 30 years left in this project, because I'm decidedly unemployable, and I'm in my last job. And so I think in terms of advice, I would echo something I heard April say, 30 minutes ago, which is this is such a massive project that we really need all hands. And the beautiful thing about that is that whatever it is that you are, your unique ability, whatever it is at the intersection of your skill set and your passion, there's a place for that in the clean energy transition. In our company, we are hiring lots of electricians and plumbers. We are also hiring lawyers and finance analysts and land development people and marketing people and sales people. And in a broader context, there's lots of need for community organizers and social scientists and material science researchers and everything you can imagine. So whatever it is that floats your boat, there's need for and opportunity for in this work. And so, it's kind of cliched, but I believe strongly that, and I think your generation generally lives into this maybe in a more authentic way than a lot of the previous ones, you should do something that you love. You're not going to love your job every day, but it's crazy to hate your job every day. And so you should do something that you love, and there's plenty of opportunity to do that here.
I was just going to add one alibi, too, as I was thinking about it and hearing these wonderful people talk. There's this whole other wave of the side of the industry, which is actually the opposite, which is not using energy. And ecosystem services and circularity are really big topics that are on our horizon. How do we keep things in circulation for longer? How do we eliminate single use of anything, including everything from fashion to what we hear a lot about, like straws and plastic water bottles, to our cars and everything else. And so we have students that go to Nike and work in sustainable supply chains and fashion and are making tennis shoes made out of garbage, and others who are, in finance or at a tech company, or actually co-founding or bringing innovation to the space. And so, there's just such a broad ecosystem, and a lot of students that I talk to, I like to talk about some of those examples because it inspires, I think, these roles you don't think that exist in companies and brands that you use and engage with every day. So I would encourage everyone to just literally search your favorite top 5 companies and see whether they have climate targets. Almost every company nowadays does, and typically are growing teams of people to help them achieve those targets. Thanks.
So now I'm going to put up my feet, and you all are going to do my job for me. So I hope you're equipped with your questions, and I believe there's going to be a roving microphone.
Yes, there should be a couple of microphones, front and back. There's a question right down here in the front, Kathy, if you wouldn't mind running down.
Yeah,
She's almost with you.
about to, but she's quick.
Thanks a lot.
You're fast, thank you. Hi, thank you, wonderful presentation. My name is Paul Friedrichs. I'm the volunteer board chair of New Hampshire Healthcare Workers for Climate Action. And my question, and our mission is to educate our New Hampshire communities about the adverse health impacts of climate change. My question goes back to one of Sam's first slides, where we saw the absence of New Hampshire on all those standards and goals set in New England. And my question is, given that the New Hampshire government has had its head in the sand for the past 15 years about climate change, and given that our legislature's majority is led by climate deniers, and possibly the PUC as well, should we put our energies into getting the state to come up with a new climate action plan and those sorts of things, or should we just let business take care of it because you're going in that direction? Should we just get on the coattails of ISO and go into the future and give up on our state government?
I'd like to take this one. I think this is a really exciting one and one that we've faced in the last handful of years in our state. And I think when we have clear policies that tell us where the current administration is, whatever that is, local, national, or otherwise, it tells us what we have to do. And fortunately or unfortunately, we have an all of the above need, right? And so we can wait for policymakers to inspire action, or we take a clear signal of what they're likely to do or not to do, and inspire businesses, enact community organization, and really kind of build the coalition, whether it's at the hyper-local level. Everyone says all action, climate action is local, but a lot of times we're kind of waiting for someone else to kickstart it. And so we need all of the above working, and when policy is failing us, we need to then shift to the other levers and put more emphasis on them, while also putting pressure on the policymakers to get on board. It's very clear now that we are, being left out of the climate economy and that transition, and that's concerning. But it also gives us a clear roadmap to say, here are the other levers that we need to be pulling while they're figuring themselves out.
Totally agree with that. And I would say, 20 years ago, we needed people to buy into the climate motivation in order to take action. Today, as Sam says, we're in a new phase, and it's actually, we think you should, but it's actually not necessary to be motivated by climate to do this work, because you can be motivated simply by dollars. And the reality is, especially in the electricity world, we exist in a regional ecosystem, right? We're part of a regional grid. And when all the other states are doing something, New Hampshire's lack of doing something is going to cost New Hampshire money. And one example is a number of the shared costs of the transmission system, the ISO New England transmission level systems, are shared by the 5 or 6 New England states. And they are shared pro rata to the state's load at the time of the system peak. One day a year, or 1 hour a month, 1 15-minute segment a month. If all the other states are doing a good job of lowering their peak, guess who is left holding the bag, paying a disproportionate share? And so you probably will not convince the current administration to care about climate, but I bet they care about electric bills going up, right? And I think Tom and Unitil have done a good job of making that argument. Same for efficiency stuff, right? Efficiency investments pay for themselves, and so you're crazy not to do it. And you don't have to care at all about the climate bit, although you should.
Let's bring in some other questions from the audience. Kat, there's one, just about down there. There you go, you got it. And then there's one over there. If you put your hand up, we'll make sure the mic comes to you next.
Yeah, so I was wondering, with the increase that we're seeing in electric vehicles and solar generation at houses, there's been the increased need for storage of energy. And with that came all of the lithium ion batteries and everything. And now we're seeing that there's actually a lot of emissions from creating those batteries. How are we planning to manage that? Or is there an alternate solution to using lithium ion batteries to deal with this excess energy generation we're having?
Great question.
You want to start, Tom?
Yeah, I don't know that I'm an expert on battery technology, but I agree 100% that sometimes the cure is as bad as what we're trying to cure in terms of environmental impacts. I do think there's opportunities to recycle lithium-ion batteries and recycle technologies, which is one thing we should be doing automatically, because that's the obvious answer. I also think that there's going to be new battery technologies that emerge in the years ahead. That's going to dramatically, I think, change some of those impacts, is solid-state batteries, other battery technologies that have lower impact but also higher energy density. The worldwide constraint on the availability of lithium is part of the thing that's driving the high cost of batteries nowadays as it is, and it's going to be an impediment to implementing more electric vehicles in the years ahead. So I think improvements in battery technology is going to be a big part of this, but certainly the batteries we have now, we have to do a better job at just recycling and reusing what we already have.
I'll say one quick thing with this. So it is good and right for us to think about and analyze the environmental footprint, life cycle footprint of all the things we are building. And there are lots of people doing really good work on battery supply chain in particular. And as Tom says, the problem sort of gets less over time as battery performance improves and as battery recycling improves. I think it's also really important as educated consumers of news to understand that a lot of the information you read about that is not offered in good faith and is not robust to investigation. So if you look at the actual environmental footprint over its life of a diesel burning truck versus a battery powered truck, it's not even close. And especially when you think that battery is going to have a second, a third, and a fourth life, and the diesel is once through and then done. And so I'm not saying there is not an important thing there. I just think it's really important to recognize the fossil fuel economy of the last 100 years has been great for mankind, right? Has elevated our standard of living across the planet, in some places more than others, in an unmeasurable way. And it has also made a lot of people incredibly wealthy. And there are lots of forces who will resist the transition away from that system, and they have a fair bit of power in the ecosystem of information that we consume. And so I would encourage you to be discerning consumers of information of that type in particular.
And I just have one alibi, which is a personal pet peeve that I encourage all of you, if you leave with nothing else, it's to just disassociate storage with batteries. There are additional technologies that are very well suited for different use cases, and batteries are just one for just a few. And so I just want to park that because I hear a lot of talk about storage and then batteries comes with it as if it's the exclusive technology. And there are very, very interesting examples around the world where we have energy storage at scale, long duration, 8+ hours of utility scale electricity storage that's keeping the grids and the lights on. And so I just want to park that because I think all of the faculty in the room will be excited, but some of these case studies of how we can apply that in the US are really, really exciting, and there's a big world of energy storage technologies out there.
That's great, thank you.
I have a 6 kilowatt-hour battery in my basement. It's called my hot water tank.
That's right. There was a question, there's one in the... Oh, thank you, yes.
In the last 2 months-ish, there's been a bunch of breakthroughs in nuclear fusion, which is a lot more efficient and better than fission. Do you think in the next couple of years this will be more commercialized and will be running more than some of these other energy resources that we've been using?
I didn't hear that.
Fusion.
Fusion.
I'll talk about fusion if people want.
Go for it.
It's really important to understand where fusion is at in terms of the breakthrough that was announced. What was announced was not that the actual whole system itself was energy positive, but just the very specific reaction that they were monitoring. And so we're not even at the point where they're getting more energy out than what they're putting in yet. And that's not to poo-poo fusion. I actually think that it might have a very important role in the future. It's just to say there's a lot of work left to go. And you use the term efficient, and so actually the system that they announced has negative efficiency as it stands. They're actually putting more energy in than they're getting out. What they demonstrated is that it's feasible that they can get to a place where that's not the case. I would just say if we're waiting for fusion to solve climate change, we might be waiting for decades.
This is really important. We have all the tools we need to get 90% of the way to a fully carbon-free grid in the next 20 years. And we have to run at that at full speed with the tools we have while working on the tools we don't yet have and hoping that they serve as backups. But we got one planet, It is deeply irresponsible to do nothing and to hope that we have a breakthrough in 2040 that saves 20 years of inaction. And maybe a decade ago, we didn't even have the tools, and so we had to pray for a savior. Today, we have all the tools we need. We got all the technology we need to do this stuff, and we got all the finance tools, and we got all, and I don't know, the work of the next 20 years is deploy. By all means, go do some research. God bless you in the lab. The work of the next 20 years is massive infrastructure project like we have never seen in the history of the world that dwarfs rural electrification at the beginning of the century, dwarfs the interstate highway system, and we can do it, right? It's wrench turning. It's stuff we know how to do. We just have to get after it.
Well, I think that's a perfect note to end on, right? You've heard it here. This transition needs to happen. It is happening. And I think most excitingly for all of you, it's creating incredible career opportunity, economic opportunity, right? There's a lot of work to be done, but there's so much opportunity in this. So please join me in thanking Sam for moderating this conversation and our three incredible speakers.